The mountain man at the edge of Ukiah, California, had lived alone for 7 years, and in all that time, no woman had ever stepped foot inside his cabin, let alone handed him a cup of coffee in the morning light. Weston Quade had built his life in the Sierra Nevada foothills with his own 2 hands, carving out an existence that required nothing from the world below, except the occasional supply run into town. His cabin sat nestled among towering pines and granite outcroppings, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through the wilderness like a snake through tall grass. The year was 1878, and the Wild West was still wild in these parts, where civilization fought a losing battle against the vast expanse of untamed land. He stood 6'4" in his worn leather boots, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun and arms thick with muscle from years of swinging an axe hauling timber and wrestling with the unforgiving mountain terrain. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, often tied back with a strip of leather when he worked, and his jaw was covered in a thick beard that he trimmed only when it became inconvenient. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who had built everything he owned and asked no one for help. Women in Ukiah whispered about him when he came to town, this silent giant who bought his supplies with gold dust and spoke only when necessary. They wondered what drove a man to live so far from civilization, what secrets he carried in those storm-gray eyes that seemed to look through a person rather than at them. But Weston had no interest in their speculation or their company. He had learned long ago that people brought complications, and complications brought pain. That was before Nora Kincaid arrived in Ukiah on a dusty stagecoach in late September, with nothing but a carpet bag and a determination that burned brighter than the California sun. Weston was in town that day, loading supplies onto his pack mule, when he heard the commotion at the stagecoach station. A young woman was arguing with the driver, her voice carrying across the street with surprising force. "I paid for passage to Ukiah, and here I am in Ukiah. You have no right to keep my belongings. Lady, I got orders from your uncle. He paid extra to make sure you got delivered proper, and proper means I hand you over to him personal. My uncle has no authority over me. I am 23 years old and perfectly capable of deciding my own destination." Weston glanced over despite himself. The woman stood barely over 5 feet tall, with auburn hair pinned up in a style that was already coming loose from travel. Her dress was practical but well made, suggesting she came from means, and her green eyes flashed with a fire that reminded him of a cornered wildcat. She was pretty in a way that made men look twice, with delicate features and a stubborn set to her chin that suggested she was more trouble than her small frame implied. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Harmon, crossed his arms and shook his head. "Ain't my problem what you think, miss. I got my instructions. Then I will retrieve my belongings myself." She reached for the boot of the coach. Harmon grabbed her wrist. "Now hold on just a..." Weston found himself moving before he made a conscious decision, crossing the street in long strides that ate up the distance. His shadow fell across both of them, and Harmon looked up with a start, immediately releasing the woman's wrist. "There's a problem here." Weston's voice was low, rough from disuse, like stones grinding together. Harmon stepped back. Everyone in Ukiah knew better than to cross Weston Quade. The mountain man rarely involved himself in town business, but when he did, folks paid attention. There were stories about what happened to the 3 claim jumpers who had tried to run him off his land 5 years back. Stories that ended with those men leaving California and never coming back. "No problem, Weston. Just trying to do my job is all. Her belongings in that coach. Well, yes, but give them to her." Harmon looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Weston's expression stopped him. He muttered under his breath and hauled the carpet bag from the boot, dropping it at Nora's feet with more force than necessary. "Your uncle ain't going to be happy about this. That is my concern, not yours." Nora bent to pick up her bag, but Weston had already lifted it with one hand as though it weighed nothing. She straightened and looked up at him, really looked at him, and for a moment something passed between them that Weston could not name. Recognition, perhaps, though they had never met. Or maybe just the acknowledgement that they were both people who did not fit easily into the world's expectations. "Thank you," she said, and her voice had lost its sharp edge, replaced by something softer. "I appreciate your intervention." Weston nodded once and set her bag down beside her, then turned to walk back to his mule. He had done his good deed for the year. Time to head back to the mountain. "Wait." Her hand touched his arm, light as a bird landing on a branch. "I do not suppose you know of any respectable boarding houses in town. I will need lodging while I search for employment." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then at her face. "You should go back to wherever you came from. Ukiah ain't the place for a woman alone. I have nowhere to go back to." She said it simply, without self-pity. "This is where I choose to make my way. Your choice to make." He pulled his arm free gently and walked away, ignoring the strange pull in his chest that wanted him to turn around and look at her again. But he did not turn around. He finished loading his supplies, mounted his mule, and rode out of town without a backward glance. By the time he reached his cabin as the sun was setting, he had already begun to forget the green-eyed woman with the stubborn chin. Or so he told himself. 3 days later, Weston was checking his trap line in the forest when he heard voices drifting through the trees. Male voices, rough and slurred with drink, and then a woman's voice, sharp with fear trying to sound like anger. "I told you, I am simply lost. If you would point me toward the town, I will be on my way." "Lost," she says. "All the way up here in the mountains, and she just got lost." Laughter, ugly and knowing. "Now what do you suppose a fine lady like you was really doing up here? Looking for some company, maybe?" Weston moved silently through the underbrush, following the sound. In a small clearing ahead, he saw 3 men surrounding the woman from the stage-coach station. Nora. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and she held a large stick in front of her like a weapon, but her hands were shaking. "Stay back," she warned. "I am armed." "With a stick," one of the men laughed, a big brute with a scarred face. "Lady, you picked the wrong day to go wandering." Weston stepped into the clearing. "She picked the right day, you boys picked the wrong one." All 3 men spun around and recognition flashed across their faces. The big one, a troublemaker named Dutch, took a step back. "This ain't your business, Quad. I am making it my business. There are 3 of us. I can count." Weston's hand rested on the knife at his belt, and his stance shifted into something coiled and dangerous. "Question is whether you want to test those odds." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Dutch spat on the ground and jerked his head toward his companions. "Ain't worth the trouble. Come on." They backed away into the forest, their eyes never leaving Weston until the trees swallowed them up. Even then, Weston stood motionless, listening, until he was satisfied they were truly gone. Only then did he turn to Nora, who had lowered her stick and was breathing hard, her face pale. "You hurt?" "No, frightened but not hurt." She looked down at her torn dress and tried to pull it closed over her shoulder. "I suppose I owe you my gratitude again." "What the hell are you doing up here?" The words came out harsher than he intended. "This is wilderness. You got no business wandering around alone." "I was not wandering, I was looking for you." That stopped him cold. "Why?" She met his eyes squarely, though he could see the tremor in her hands. "Because I need work, and I was told in town that you live up here alone." I thought perhaps you might need someone to cook or clean or help with domestic tasks. I can work hard and I do not require much in wages, just enough to save toward buying my own property eventually. Who told you about me? The woman at the general store. Mrs. Patterson. She said you were a good man, despite what people say, and that you lived up in these mountains alone. Weston felt something twist in his chest. Mrs. Patterson had always been kind to him, one of the few people in town who treated him like a human being rather than a curiosity or a threat. She had no business sending you up here. She did not send me. I asked and she answered. The choice to come was mine. Nora lifted her chin in that stubborn way he remembered. And now that I have found you, I would like to make my proposal formally. I need work and you need help. It is a practical arrangement. I do not need help. I have been managing fine on my own. Have you? She looked at him pointedly. When was the last time you had a proper cooked meal instead of jerky and beans? When did you last have clean clothes that were not stiff with dirt? When did you sleep in a bed with freshly laundered sheets? Those are luxuries, not necessities. Even so, would it not be pleasant to have them? She took a step closer. I am an excellent cook. I can clean and mend and manage a household. I worked for a family in Boston before I came west. I have references. Why did you leave Boston? Her expression shuddered. That is my own business, and my cabin is my business. Answer the question. For a moment he thought she would refuse. Then she sighed and some of the fight went out of her posture. My uncle arranged a marriage for me to a man 3 times my age who wanted a young wife to bear his children and look pretty on his arm. I had no choice in the matter, no say in my own future. So I took what money I had saved and left. I came west because I heard there were opportunities here for people willing to work hard. I want to make my own life, on my own terms. Weston studied her face, seeing the truth in her eyes. He understood that desire better than most. You will not find easy living up here. The work is hard, the isolation is constant, and winter in these mountains is brutal. I am not afraid of hard work or isolation. As for winter, I will face it when it comes. She straightened her shoulders. I am asking for a chance. That is all. 1 month. If you are not satisfied with my work, I will leave and trouble you no more. Every instinct told him to say no, to send her back to town and maintain his solitude. He had built his life around the certainty that people could not be trusted, that letting anyone close only led to pain. But there was something in her eyes that called to him, a loneliness that matched his own, a determination to survive on her own terms that he recognized in himself. 1 month, he heard himself say. You work hard, you stay out of my way, and you do not ask questions about my past or my business. In return, I will pay you fair wages and provide room and board. If those terms are acceptable, we have a deal. Relief washed over her face so completely that it transformed her features, making her beautiful in a way that made Weston immediately regret his decision. Those terms are more than acceptable. Thank you, Mr. Quade. It is Weston. If you are going to be living in my cabin, we can skip the formalities. Then you must call me Nora. He nodded once, then turned toward the forest. Come on. It is a 2-hour walk back to the cabin, and we are losing daylight. She picked up her carpetbag and followed him without complaint, and Weston tried not to think about how his life had just changed in ways he could not predict or control. The cabin was exactly as Nora had imagined it when Mrs. Patterson described a mountain man's dwelling, which was to say it was rough and practical, and showed the signs of a man who had lived alone for too long. It was a single large room with a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder, a massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall, and furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. The windows were small, designed to keep out the winter cold, and the door was thick enough to stop a bear. But it was also surprisingly clean in a basic way. The dishes were washed and stacked neatly. The floor was swept. The bed in the loft was made with military precision. This was not the home of a man who had given up on himself, but rather a man who maintained strict control over his environment. "You can have the loft," Weston said, dropping her carpetbag near the ladder. "I will make myself a bedroll down here." "That is not necessary. I do not wish to displace you from your own bed. It is already decided." His tone made it clear the discussion was over. "There is a trunk up there with some spare blankets and pillows. Make yourself comfortable. I will be outside tending to the animals." He left before she could argue further, and Nora climbed the ladder to inspect her new quarters. The loft was small but cozy, with a real mattress stuffed with what felt like straw and pine needles. Through the small window, she could see the forest stretching out in every direction, and in the distance, the purple silhouette of higher mountains against the darkening sky. It was beautiful in a way that made her throat tight. In Boston, she had lived in her uncle's house on a street crowded with other houses, where the air smelled of coal smoke and horse manure and the press of too many people. Here, the air was clean and sharp, scented with pine and wood smoke and something else she could not name. Freedom, perhaps. She changed into her other dress, the one that was not torn, and climbed back down the ladder. There was a pump by the sink, and she tested it experimentally. Cold, clear water flowed out, and she smiled. She had worried about the water situation. Looking around the cabin with a more critical eye, she began to take inventory. The cupboards were stocked with basics: flour, cornmeal, beans, coffee, salt, sugar, and dried meat. There were some sad-looking vegetables that had seen better days, and a basket of eggs that must have come from chickens she had not yet seen. The cooking area was rudimentary but functional, with a good iron stove and basic pots and pans. She could work with this. By the time Weston came back inside, she had started a fire in the stove and was preparing a meal with the ingredients she had found. He stopped in the doorway, clearly surprised to find her already at work. "You did not have to start tonight," he said. "You have had a difficult day." "I agreed to work for my keep. There is no sense in delaying." She stirred the pot on the stove where beans were simmering with some of the dried meat and wild onions she had found hanging near the door. "Besides, cooking helps me think." He watched her for a moment, then moved to the wash basin and cleaned his hands. "I have a few chickens out back for eggs, and a milk cow that needs tending twice a day. Can you handle livestock? I grew up on a farm in Vermont before my parents died and I went to live with my uncle. I know my way around animals." "Good. That will be part of your duties then." He pulled out a chair at the rough-hewn table and sat down, looking uncomfortable in his own home. "I trap and hunt for meat and furs. I have a claim where I pan for gold a few days a week. Usually, I am gone from early morning until evening. You will have the cabin to yourself most days." "That sounds agreeable." She pulled the pot off the stove and began dishing out servings onto the 2 plates she had found. "I will keep the cabin clean, manage the livestock, and prepare meals. If you have clothes that need mending, I can handle that as well." She set a plate in front of him, and he looked at it as though he had never seen food before. "This looks good. Wait until you taste it before you pass judgment." She sat down across from him with her own plate and bowed her head briefly in a silent prayer of gratitude. When she looked up, Weston was still staring at his plate. "Something wrong?" "No." He picked up his fork slowly. "It has just been a long time since someone cooked for me." He took a bite, and Nora watched his expression carefully. It was not fancy cooking, just simple food prepared well, but the way his eyes closed for just a moment told her it had been even longer since he had eaten a decent meal than he had admitted. "It is good. he said finally, and something in his voice suggested those words did not come easily. They ate in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Just two people sharing a meal at the end of a long day. When they finished, Nora collected the plates and began washing them in the basin, and Weston sat at the table watching her with an expression she could not read. "Tomorrow morning I will show you where everything is," he said. "The chickens, the cow, the root cellar, the well. If you need to go into town for anything, you wait until I go. Do not go wandering in the forest alone. Those men today might come back around. I understand. And Nora," she turned to look at him, and his gray eyes were serious, "I meant what I said. This is a month trial. Do not get too comfortable." She nodded, but in her heart, she knew she was already comfortable. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt like she might have found a place where she could belong. That night, lying in the loft listening to the sounds of the forest outside and the crackling of the dying fire below, Nora allowed herself to feel hopeful. It was a dangerous emotion, hope. It made you vulnerable. But as she drifted off to sleep, she could not help but think that maybe, just maybe, she had made the right choice in coming up this mountain. Weston woke before dawn, as he always did, to find the cabin still dark and quiet. He dressed silently and was about to head outside when he heard movement from the loft. A moment later, Nora climbed down the ladder, already dressed, her hair pinned up neatly. "Good morning," she said softly, and before he could respond, she was moving toward the stove, building up the fire with practiced efficiency. "You do not have to get up this early," he said, surprised. "You will want breakfast before you start your day, will you not?" She glanced back at him with a slight smile. "Besides, I am accustomed to early mornings. My uncle's household ran on strict schedules." Weston stood awkwardly in his own cabin, unsure what to do with himself. He had lived alone for so long that having another person in his space felt foreign, intrusive. But also, if he was honest, not entirely unpleasant. Within 20 minutes, Nora had coffee brewing and was frying eggs and thick slices of bread in a pan. The smell filled the cabin, rich and homey, and Weston felt something shift in his chest. How long had it been since his home smelled like this? Like someone lived here instead of just survived here. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought one to him where he stood by the window. "I hope it is strong enough. I made it the way my father used to." Their fingers brushed as he took the cup from her, and electricity shot up his arm. He pulled back quickly, but not before he saw her eyes widen slightly. She had felt it too. "Thank you," he managed, taking a sip. The coffee was perfect, strong and hot, and exactly what he needed. No woman had ever handed him a cup of coffee before. In his entire adult life, Weston had served himself, relied on himself, needed no one. But standing there in the growing dawn light, accepting this simple gesture of care from Nora's hands, he felt something inside him crack. Not break, but crack open, like the first thaw after a long winter. She handed him a cup of coffee every morning after that. The first week passed in a careful dance of cohabitation. Weston would wake to find Nora already up, the fire going, coffee ready. She would hand him his cup without a word, just a small smile, and then serve him breakfast. He would eat quickly and head out for the day, leaving her to manage the cabin and the animals. When he returned in the evening, there would be a hot meal waiting, the cabin would be spotless, and his clothes would be clean and mended. They would eat together in companionable silence, and then Weston would retreat to his bedroll while Nora climbed to the loft. It was a routine, nothing more. Practical. Efficient. Exactly what he had agreed to, but Weston found himself thinking about her during the day. Wondering what she was doing, whether she was lonely, if she was happy here or already counting the days until her month was up. He noticed small changes around the cabin. Wild flowers in a jar on the table. The windows cleaned so thoroughly they seemed to disappear. His books, which had been stacked haphazardly in a corner, arranged neatly on a shelf she must have found somewhere. Little touches that made the cabin feel less like a shelter and more like a home. And every morning she handed him his coffee, and their fingers would brush, and that jolt of electricity would run through him. It was on the 8th day that Weston did something he had not done in years. He came home early. He had been checking his traps in the high country when storm clouds began rolling in fast, the kind of sudden weather change that could turn deadly in the mountains. Rather than risk getting caught out, he gathered his furs and headed back. As he approached the cabin, he heard singing. Nora's voice, clear and sweet, carrying through the open window. She was singing an old folk song he remembered from his childhood, something his mother used to hum while she worked. He stopped outside the door, listening, and felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. When he finally entered, Nora jumped, startled, her hand flying to her throat. "Oh, you scared me. I did not expect you back so soon. Storm coming." He set down his pack and the bundle of furs, figured it was safer to head back. She nodded and turned back to the dough she was kneading on the table. "I am making bread. It should be ready to bake soon." Weston washed his hands at the basin, then found himself lingering instead of retreating outside as he normally would. "You have a nice voice." Her hands stilled on the dough and a faint blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you. I did not realize you were close enough to hear. I will be quieter in the future. Do not be." The words came out rougher than he intended. "It is nice, having music in the house." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them. A recognition of the loneliness they both carried, the walls they had both built around themselves. "You said your mother used to sing," she said softly. "Do you remember her?" It was a personal question, exactly the kind he had told her not to ask. But somehow, with the afternoon light slanting through the window and her hands covered in flour and that song still echoing in his ears, he found himself answering. "She died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter." He leaned against the counter, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "My father died a year later. Grief mostly, though folks said it was his heart. I am sorry." She shaped the dough into loaves with gentle, practiced motions. "My parents died when I was 15, a carriage accident. That is when I went to live with my uncle. He was not good to you." It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "He was not cruel exactly, just controlling. He saw me as a burden and then as a commodity, something to be managed and eventually sold off to the highest bidder." She set the loaves aside to rise and wiped her hands on her apron. "I should not complain. Many women have it worse. Just because others have it worse does not mean you did not have it bad." She looked up at him, surprised. "That is a kind thing to say. I am not known for kindness." "No." A smile played at the corner of her lips. "Then what are you known for?" "Being mean as a snake and twice as dangerous, according to most folks in town." "Well, I have been living in your home for 8 days now, and I have yet to see any evidence of that. Give it time." She laughed then, a real laugh that filled the cabin with light, and Weston felt something in his chest that he had not felt in so long he almost did not recognize it. Happiness. Simple, uncomplicated happiness at making another person laugh. Outside, thunder rumbled and rain began to patter against the roof. Nora looked toward the window. "Sounds like you made it back just in time." "Looks like." But he was not looking at the storm. He was looking at her, at the flour dusting her cheek and the wisps of auburn hair escaping her bun, and the way the lamplight caught the green of her eyes. She was beautiful, and he was in trouble. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping them both inside the cabin. It was the longest time they had spent in each other's company without the buffer of Weston's daily absence. And by the second day, the walls felt like they were closing in, not because of tension, but because of proximity. Because Weston was becoming acutely aware of every sound she made, every movement, every breath. He noticed the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on her sewing, the way she hummed while she cooked, the way her laugh sounded like wind chimes in a summer breeze. And he noticed the way she looked at him sometimes, when she thought he was not watching. With curiosity, yes, but also with something else. Something that made his pulse quicken and his palms sweat like he was a green boy and not a grown man of 31 years. On the third morning, Weston woke to find her already up, standing by the window watching the rain. She had not heard him rise, and he took the opportunity to study her unobserved. She wore a simple dress that showed her figure, curves that his hands itched to explore. Her hair was loose for once, falling in waves down her back, and he imagined what it would feel like to run his fingers through it. He forced the thought away. She worked for him. She was under his protection. He had no right to think of her that way. But when she turned and saw him, when she smiled and moved to pour his coffee, when she handed him the cup and their fingers brushed, and that electricity arced between them again, he saw the same desire reflected in her eyes. "The rain is letting up," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "You will be able to check your traps soon." Yes. But he did not want to check his traps. He wanted to pull her close and kiss her until neither of them could breathe. He wanted to carry her up to that loft and show her with his hands and mouth what his words could not say. Instead, he drank his coffee and ate his breakfast and retreated to his corner of the cabin to sharpen his knives, putting physical distance between them, even though it did nothing to diminish the pull he felt. By afternoon, the rain had stopped, and Weston practically fled the cabin, mumbling something about checking for storm damage. He spent hours in the forest, trying to clear his head, trying to remind himself of all the reasons why acting on this attraction was a bad idea. She was his employee. She was running from something. She would leave when the month was up. He was not the kind of man a woman like her needed. He was rough and hard and had spent too many years alone to know how to be with someone. But when he returned to the cabin at dusk and saw her silhouetted in the window, waiting for him, all his careful reasoning crumbled to dust. She opened the door as he approached. "I was beginning to worry. No need. I can handle myself in these woods. I know that." She stepped back to let him in. "But I worried anyway." Those simple words undid him. No one had worried about him in 7 years. No one had cared whether he came home or not. But she did. This woman who barely knew him, who had been in his life for less than 2 weeks, she worried. He stopped in the doorway, so close to her he could smell the soap she used and see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Nora. Yes, he should move, should step past her and put distance between them. Should not do what every instinct was screaming at him to do. "That first morning," he said roughly, "when you handed me coffee, no woman had ever done that before, never served me or cared whether I had a hot meal or a clean shirt. I have spent my whole adult life alone by choice because it was easier than trusting someone. And now—" her voice was barely a whisper. "Now I wake up every morning and the first thing I think about is seeing you, watching you hand me that cup of coffee, hearing your voice, and it scares the hell out of me." She reached up and touched his face, her small hand against his bearded jaw, and he felt that touch everywhere. "It scares me too. I came here to build a life on my own terms, to be independent. I did not plan on this." "On what?" "On you." She looked up at him with those green eyes that saw too much. "On caring about what happens to you. On wanting to stay, not because I need work, but because I do not want to imagine being anywhere else." Weston's control snapped. He pulled her against him, one hand cupping the back of her head, the other wrapping around her waist, and kissed her with all the hunger he had been suppressing for 2 weeks. She melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, kissing him back with equal fervor. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate and raw and full of need, months and years of loneliness pouring out in the way their mouths moved together, the way their bodies pressed close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Weston rested his forehead against hers. "This is a bad idea, probably." She was smiling despite her breathlessness. "Your month is not even half over. You might still want to leave." "I will not want to leave. You do not know that." She pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. "Weston Quade, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I came up this mountain looking for work, but I found something more important. I found someone who sees me not as a burden or a commodity, but as a person. Someone who values my work and my company. Someone who makes me feel safe and wanted and alive." She traced her thumb along his jaw. "So no, I will not want to leave. The question is whether you want me to stay." He answered by kissing her again, softer this time but no less intense. When he pulled back, his voice was rough with emotion. "Stay, not as my employee, as my partner, as my—" "Yes." She did not make him finish the sentence. "Whatever you are going to say, the answer is yes." That night, Weston did not sleep in his bedroll on the floor. He climbed the ladder to the loft where Nora was waiting, and they talked long into the night, sharing stories about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. And when talking turned to touching, and touching to making love, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterward, with Nora curled against his chest and his arms wrapped around her smaller frame, Weston felt a peace he had not known in years. Maybe ever. This woman had walked into his life 2 weeks ago with nothing but determination and stubbornness, and somehow she had made him whole again. She handed him coffee every morning, and somewhere along the way, without either of them planning it, he had become hers. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Weston's life. He and Nora fell into a new rhythm, one built on partnership rather than employer and employee. They worked together to manage the homestead, with Nora taking over the domestic tasks and Weston handling the heavier labor of hunting, trapping, and working his claim. But they also found time for joy. Weston taught Nora to fish in the stream that ran near the cabin, and she taught him to dance to the songs she sang. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. And every night, they would climb to the loft together, learning each other's bodies with the patience and passion of people who knew they had found something rare and precious. Weston found himself smiling more, laughing at Nora's observations about the world. She had a sharp wit and a way of seeing humor in situations that would have frustrated him before. She made him want to be better, softer, more open to possibility, and Nora bloomed under Weston's protection and affection. The haunted look that had lingered in her eyes when she first arrived faded, replaced by a contentment that made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her physical features. She sang constantly now, filling the cabin and the surrounding forest with music. She planted a small garden near the cabin, coaxing vegetables from the mountain soil with determination and care. They were building a life together, and it felt right in a way that neither of them had experienced before. It was 6 weeks after Nora's arrival that trouble found them. Weston had gone into Ukiah for supplies, and Nora had insisted on coming with him. It was her first trip back to town since she had climbed the mountain, and she was excited to see Mrs. Patterson and thank her for the advice that had led her to Weston. They arrived in the late morning, the sun already hot overhead. October in California's foothills could still be warm, especially at lower elevations. Weston pulled their wagon up in front of the general store, and Mrs. Patterson came bustling out, her face breaking into a wide smile when she saw Nora. "Well, if it is not our little lost lamb, I was wondering if you had survived up there in the wilderness." She gave Nora a quick embrace, then looked at Weston with knowing eyes. "And I see you have been taking good care of her." "She has been taking care of me," Weston said gruffly, but there was warmth in his voice. Mrs. Patterson laughed. "I am sure you both take care of each other. That is how it should be." She turned back to Nora. "So tell me, dear, are you planning to stay? Or was the mountain too wild for you?" "I am staying," Nora said firmly, and she reached for Weston's hand. "Permanently, if he will have me." "He will," Weston said, and the certainty in his voice made Nora's heart swell. They were heading into the store when a well-dressed man emerged from the hotel across the street. He was in his 50s, with silver hair and an expensive suit that marked him as someone from the city. When he saw Nora, he stopped dead, his face darkening with anger. "Nora Kincaid." Nora's hand tightened on Weston's arm, and he felt her entire body tense. "Uncle Charles." The man crossed the street with quick, angry strides. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you have caused? I had to make excuses to Mr. Whitmore, compensate him for the broken engagement. The entire family has been humiliated by your reckless behavior." "I did not agree to an engagement," Nora said, her voice steady despite the fear Weston could feel radiating from her. "You arranged it without my consent. You are family. You do not get to consent. You do as you are told." Charles's eyes flicked to Weston dismissively. "And now I find you here, apparently living in sin with some mountain ruffian. Have you no shame?" Weston felt anger rise in his chest, hot and fierce. "Watch your mouth." Charles looked at him properly for the first time, and something in Weston's expression made him take a step back. But he recovered quickly, drawing himself up. "This does not concern you. Nora is my niece, and she is coming back to Boston with me." "No, I am not." Nora moved to stand beside Weston, no longer cowering. "I am 23 years old, Uncle Charles. I am of legal age to make my own decisions, and I have decided to stay here, in this backwater town with this. He gestured at Weston with obvious disdain. "You could have had a life of comfort and security. Instead, you choose poverty and disgrace." "I choose freedom," Nora said firmly, "and love, which are worth more than all the comfort and security you could ever offer." "Love," Charles laughed bitterly. "You are a foolish girl. This man will tire of you soon enough, and then where will you be? Destitute and alone in the wilderness." Weston had heard enough. He took a step forward, using his considerable size to his advantage, and his voice dropped to something dangerous. "You need to leave. Now." "I am not leaving without my niece." "Yes, you are." Weston did not raise his voice, did not need to. "Nora has made her choice. She stays with me, and if you try to force the issue, you will discover why people in these parts know better than to cross me." For a long moment, Charles stared at him, trying to decide if Weston was bluffing. Then he looked into Weston's eyes and saw the truth there. This mountain man was not making a threat. He was making a promise. Charles turned to Nora one last time. "You are making a mistake. When you realize that, do not bother coming back. The family is done with you." "That is acceptable to me," Nora said, and though her voice trembled slightly, her stance remained firm. Charles turned and walked back to the hotel, his back rigid with fury. Weston watched him go, making sure he actually left, while Nora sagged against his side. Mrs. Patterson, who had watched the whole exchange from the doorway of the store, came over and squeezed Nora's hand. "You did the right thing, dear. That man has no power over you anymore." "I know," Nora said, but tears were running down her face. "It is just, he was family, the only family I had left. Not anymore. Weston pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried. I am your family now, and I will never try to control you or sell you off to the highest bidder. You are mine and I am yours, and that is all that matters. She nodded against his chest, and he could feel her gathering her strength, pulling herself together. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red but determined. You are right. I am done looking back. From now on, I only look forward. They completed their shopping quickly after that, with Mrs. Patterson adding little extras to their supplies. Things she claimed were on sale, but Weston suspected she was simply gifting them. The older woman had a soft heart, and she clearly approved of the match. On the ride back up the mountain, Nora was quiet, and Weston let her process her feelings without forcing conversation. It was only when they were nearly home that she spoke. You really see me that way. As family, I see you as more than that. He kept his eyes on the trail but reached over to take her hand. I see you as my future, as the person I want to spend the rest of my life with, if you will have me. She turned to look at him, her eyes wide. Weston Quade, are you asking me to marry you? I suppose I am. Though I am doing a poor job of it. He pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her properly. I do not have much to offer you, just a cabin in the mountains and a life of hard work. But what I do have is yours. My home, my protection, my heart, all of it. So yes, Nora Kincaid, I am asking you to marry me. Will you? Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were happy tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He kissed her there on the trail, with the autumn sun filtering through the pines and the sound of a nearby stream providing music. And when they finally pulled apart, Nora was laughing and crying at the same time. I came west looking for freedom, she said. And I found so much more. I found home. So did I, Weston said, and he realized it was true. The cabin had never been home before Nora arrived. It had just been a place to sleep. But now, with her by his side, it felt like a place where he belonged. They were married 3 weeks later by the circuit preacher who came through Ukiah once a month. It was a simple ceremony, held at Mrs. Patterson's house with only a handful of witnesses. Nora wore a simple dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, and Weston wore his cleanest clothes and looked uncomfortable the entire time. But when they spoke their vows, there was nothing uncomfortable about the emotion in their voices. Weston promised to love and protect Nora for as long as he lived. Nora promised to stand by Weston through whatever challenges life brought them. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Weston kissed his bride with a tenderness that made Mrs. Patterson dab at her eyes with her handkerchief. The wedding supper was held at the hotel, with Mrs. Patterson insisting on paying for everything despite Weston's protests. A few of the townspeople who had been kind to Weston over the years attended, and there was music and dancing and genuine happiness. But the best part of the night came later, when they returned to their cabin on the mountain. Weston carried Nora over the threshold, and she laughed and told him he was being overly traditional. He set her down gently in the middle of the room and looked around at the space they would share as husband and wife. It is not much, he said, suddenly uncertain. It is everything, Nora corrected him. She took his face in her hands and made him look at her. You know what I see when I look at this cabin? I see a place where I am safe, where I am valued, where I am loved. I see the home we will build together, the life we will create. I see our future, Weston, and it is beautiful. He kissed her then, pouring all his love and gratitude into that kiss, and when he carried her up to the loft that night, it was not as employer and employee or even as courting couple. It was as husband and wife, two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build a life together. The winter that followed was harsh, as winters in the mountains always were. Snow fell heavy and deep, trapping them in the cabin for days at a time. But Weston and Nora did not mind. They had each other, and that was enough. Weston taught Nora how to read tracks in the snow, how to identify different trees by their bark, how to survive if she ever got lost in the wilderness. Nora taught Weston how to read, really read, not just the basic literacy he had learned as a child, but how to lose himself in stories. She had brought a few books with her from Boston, and they read them together by the firelight, Nora's head on Weston's shoulder, his arm around her waist. They talked about their dreams for the future. Weston wanted to expand his claim, maybe buy more land and build a proper house. Nora wanted a larger garden and maybe some goats for milk and cheese. They both wanted children, though they agreed to wait a year or two to enjoy being just the two of them for a while. But fate had other plans. In late February, Nora woke feeling unwell. At first they thought it was something she had eaten, but when the sickness continued morning after morning, realization dawned. "I think I am pregnant," Nora said one morning, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Weston felt his heart stop, then restart at double speed. "Are you sure?" "No, but all the signs point to it." She looked up at him with a mixture of joy and fear. I know we wanted to wait, but he cut off her words with a kiss. "I do not care about waiting. If you are carrying our child, then that is the best news I could ask for. You are not angry. He laughed and pulled her into his arms. "Nora, you have given me everything, a home, a purpose, love, and now a child. How could I possibly be angry?" She relaxed against him, relief evident in every line of her body. "I was worried you would think it was too soon." "It is never too soon for good things." He kissed the top of her head. "We will figure it out together. That is what partners do." As winter gave way to spring, Nora's pregnancy became obvious. Her belly swelled with their child, and Weston found himself overwhelmed with tenderness every time he looked at her. He became overprotective, insisting she not lift anything heavy, that she rest more, that she take care of herself. Nora tolerated his hovering with good humor, though she also reminded him firmly that she was pregnant, not broken. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time," she told him when he tried to stop her from tending the garden. "I am perfectly capable of managing a few vegetables." Still, Weston could not help but worry. The nearest doctor was in Ukiah, hours away by wagon over rough mountain trails. If something went wrong during the birth, if Nora needed help. As if sensing his thoughts, Nora took his hand one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am going to be fine, and so is our baby. You cannot know that. No, I cannot, but I can have faith, and I can trust that you will be there with me no matter what happens." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Always, I will always be there with you, Mrs. Patterson came up to the cabin in late summer, bringing supplies and her own expertise. She had helped birth more babies than Weston could count, and her presence eased some of his worry. She examined Nora and declared her healthy and strong, and the baby active and well-positioned. "You have nothing to worry about, Weston Quade," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Your wife is built for this. She will do just fine." Still, when Nora went into labor on a cool September evening, Weston felt panic grip his chest in a way that no physical danger ever had. Mrs. Patterson had stayed at the cabin for the last 2 weeks, preparing for this moment, and she took charge immediately, sending Weston to boil water and gather clean cloths. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Weston paced the cabin like a caged animal, listening to Nora's cries of pain and feeling utterly helpless. This was not something he could fight or fix. All he could do was be there, holding her hand when she needed him, wiping the sweat from her forehead, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. "I can see the head," Mrs. Patterson announced in the late afternoon. Come on, Nora, one more big push. Nora bore down with all her strength, and suddenly the cabin was filled with the sound of a baby crying. Weston felt tears stream down his face as Mrs. Patterson held up a tiny, perfect infant. "It is a girl," Mrs. Patterson announced with a huge smile. "A beautiful, healthy baby girl." She cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped her in a soft blanket, then placed her in Nora's arms. Weston knelt beside the bed, looking at his daughter for the first time, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. She was so small, with a cap of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. Her eyes opened and she looked right at him, and Weston fell in love for the second time in his life. "Hello, little one," Nora whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of labor but filled with joy. "We have been waiting for you." "She is perfect," Weston said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like her mother." They named her Willow after the trees that grew along the stream near the cabin. Willow Quade, their daughter, the living symbol of their love. The first months of Willow's life were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. She was a good baby, rarely fussing, but she still demanded constant care. Nora handled most of the nighttime feedings, but Weston would wake with her, keeping her company in the dark hours, sometimes holding Willow so Nora could sleep a little longer. He was amazed by how tiny she was, how fragile. His hands, so used to rough work and hard living, learned to be gentle. He could hold his daughter in one palm, and the trust she showed in him, the way she would sleep peacefully in his arms, made him determined to be the best father he could be. As Willow grew, she proved to be a happy, curious child. She had Nora's green eyes and Weston's dark hair, and a personality that was entirely her own. By her first birthday, she was walking and getting into everything, exploring the cabin and the area around it with fearless enthusiasm. Weston built a small fence around the porch to keep her safe, and Nora sewed tiny dresses that Willow would inevitably get dirty within minutes of putting them on. They were both exhausted and happier than they had ever been. On the morning of their second wedding anniversary, Weston woke to find Nora already up as always. But this time, she was standing in the cabin with 2 cups of coffee, one for each of them. "Happy anniversary," she said, handing him his cup. Their fingers brushed, that familiar electricity still there after 2 years, but now it was joined by something deeper. A comfort, a certainty, the knowledge that they were in this together, for better or worse, for the rest of their lives. "I was thinking about that first morning," Nora said, sitting beside him, "when I handed you coffee for the first time. I was just thinking about that too." He took a sip, savoring the rich flavor. "No woman had ever done that for me before, and I have done it every morning since," she smiled. "Well, except for a few times when Willow decided dawn was playtime." He laughed and pulled her close. "That first morning I told myself it did not mean anything, that it was just a practical arrangement. You needed work, I needed help. But it was never just that, was it? No." He kissed her temple. "From the first moment you handed me that cup, you were already changing me, making me see that maybe a life alone was not the only option, that maybe I could let someone in. And look at us now." Nora gestured around the cabin, where evidence of their life together was everywhere. Willow's toys scattered on the floor, pictures Nora had drawn hanging on the walls, Weston's tools neatly organized by the door. "We built something beautiful. We did." He set down his coffee and took both her hands. "These past 2 years have been the best of my life. You and Willow, you are everything to me, my whole world. You are our world too." She leaned in and kissed him softly. "And I want you to know something, Weston. Every morning when I hand you that cup of coffee, I do it because I love you, because I want to take care of you the way you take care of me, because that simple gesture means we are together, that we chose each other, that we are home." He felt tears prick his eyes and did not bother to hide them. "I love you, Nora Quade, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." They sat there in the morning light, holding each other, until Willow woke with a cry from the loft. Nora started to rise, but Weston stopped her. "I will get her. You sit and enjoy your coffee while it is still hot." He climbed the ladder and scooped up his daughter, who immediately stopped crying and gave him a gummy smile that made his heart melt. He brought her down and settled her on his lap, and Nora poured milk into a cup for Willow while Weston held her steady. This was his life now. This simple, beautiful, ordinary life. And he would not trade it for anything in the world. The years passed, measured in seasons and small moments. Willow grew into a bright, energetic child who loved exploring the mountains with her father and learning to cook and garden with her mother. When she was 3, Nora announced she was pregnant again, and 9 months later they welcomed a son they named Wade. Wade was different from Willow, quieter and more serious, but just as loved. He followed his father everywhere, watching with solemn eyes as Weston worked, trying to imitate everything the big man did. The cabin felt smaller with 4 of them, so Weston began building an addition. It took him 2 years, working on it whenever he had time. But eventually they had a proper house with separate bedrooms for the children and more space for their growing family. Nora's garden expanded each year, and she began preserving enough food that they rarely needed to go into town for supplies. She also started trading her preserves with folks in Ukiah, building a small business that brought in extra income. Weston's claim proved productive enough that he was able to buy the land surrounding their home, giving them more space and security. He also took on occasional work as a guide for people traveling through the mountains, using his knowledge of the wilderness to help others navigate safely. They were building something together, a legacy for their children. And every morning, no matter how busy they were, no matter what challenges they faced, Nora handed Weston his cup of coffee. It was their ritual, their moment of connection before the day began. The children grew to recognize this as something special between their parents. Sometimes Willow would ask, "Why do you always give Papa his coffee like that?" And Nora would smile and say, "Because it is our way of saying I love you without words." When Willow was 10 and Wade was 7, Nora became pregnant again. It was unexpected, as they had thought they were done having children, but not unwelcome. This pregnancy was harder than the first 2, and Nora was often tired and sick. Weston took on more of the household duties, and the children pitched in as much as they could. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 70s, still made the journey up the mountain to check on Nora and reassure them that everything was progressing normally. "Some pregnancies are just harder than others," she told them, "but Nora is strong. She will get through this." The baby, another girl they named Willa, was born in early spring. She was tiny but healthy, with Nora's auburn hair, and a temperament that suggested she would be giving them a run for their money as she grew. With 3 children, life became even more chaotic. But it was a good chaos, filled with laughter and love and the constant noise that comes with a house full of young ones. Weston, who had once craved silence and solitude, found he could not imagine his life without this beautiful, messy fullness. On the morning of their 10th wedding anniversary, Weston woke before Nora for the first time in years. He carefully extracted himself from the bed without waking her and climbed down from the loft. The children were still asleep, which meant he had a rare moment of quiet. He built up the fire and put coffee on to brew, doing the tasks that Nora usually handled. When the coffee was ready, he poured 2 cups and carried them up to the loft. Nora stirred as he climbed the ladder, blinking sleepily. "Weston, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done years ago." He sat on the edge of the bed and handed her a cup of coffee. "Thank you." She took the cup, confused. "For what?" "For every morning you have handed me coffee for the past 10 years. For choosing me when you could have chosen comfort and security. For building this life with me, for our children. For everything." He took her free hand. "I know I do not say it enough, but I am grateful every single day that you walked into my life." Tears filled her eyes. "Weston Quade, you are going to make me cry before I have even had my coffee." "Then drink your coffee first and cry after." He smiled, that rare smile that transformed his face from intimidating to beautiful. They sat there together, drinking their coffee and watching the sun rise through the window, and Nora thought about how far they had come. From 2 lonely people to a family of 5. From a practical arrangement to the deepest love she had ever known. "You remember what you said that first day?" Nora asked. "When I asked if I could work for you, I said it was a month trial, that you should not get too comfortable. And yet here we are, 10 years later." She set down her cup and cuddled into his side. "I am very comfortable now." He wrapped his arm around her and kissed the top of her head. "Good, because you are stuck with me. I cannot think of anywhere else I would rather be stuck." They heard stirring from the children's rooms, signaling the start of another busy day. But they took one more moment, just the 2 of them, savoring the peace and the love and the life they had built. Weston thought back to the man he had been before Nora arrived. Isolated, angry at the world, certain that he was better off alone. And he marveled at how wrong he had been. He had not been better off. He had been slowly dying, even if his heart was still beating. Nora had brought him back to life. She had taken a broken, lonely man and helped him become someone capable of love and joy and hope. And he had done the same for her, giving her the freedom and safety to become the person she was meant to be. "I love you," he said, because those words never got old and never lost their meaning. "I love you too," she replied. And then they heard Willa start to cry and the moment of peace was over. But that was all right. Because every moment with Nora, even the chaotic ones, was worth more than all the quiet solitude in the world. The children grew as children do. Willow became a teenager with her mother's sharp mind and her father's stubbornness, constantly pushing boundaries and testing limits. Wade remained quiet but developed a deep love for the mountains and the wilderness, spending hours exploring with his father. Willa proved to be a handful, energetic and fearless, climbing everything and asking a million questions about everything. Weston and Nora navigated parenthood together, sometimes making mistakes but always learning from them. They taught their children the value of hard work, the importance of honesty, and the power of love. They raised them to be strong and independent, to think for themselves and stand up for what was right. And every morning, no matter how crazy life got, Nora handed Weston his cup of coffee. It was the constant in their ever-changing world, the ritual that grounded them both. When Willow was 16, a young man from town started courting her. His name was Samuel, and he was a good kid from a good family. But Weston still felt the need to have a talk with him, to make sure he understood that Willow was precious and deserved to be treated with respect. Samuel, who had heard stories about the mountain man his whole life, was understandably nervous during this conversation. But Weston was impressed by how the young man stood his ground, looked him in the eye, and promised to treat Willow well. "He seems like a good one," Nora said after Samuel left. "He does," Weston admitted reluctantly, "but she is still too young. She is the same age I was when I left Boston. Old enough to make her own choices. That is what worries me." Nora laughed and kissed his cheek. "She has a good head on her shoulders. We raised her right. Trust her." And he did trust Willow. It was the world he did not trust, but he also knew that he could not protect his children forever. Eventually, They would have to make their own way, just as he and Nora had. Wade, at 14, announced that he wanted to be a mountain guide like his father. He had already proven himself skilled at tracking and navigation, and several people in town had specifically requested him when they needed someone to take them into the high country. Weston felt pride swell in his chest at his son's declaration. "It is hard work, dangerous sometimes. I know. But I love it, the same way you do. Then I will teach you everything I know." And he did, spending long hours with Wade in the wilderness, passing on knowledge that had been passed to him by his own father. Watching his son learn and grow, Weston felt the circle of life continue, and it was beautiful. Willa, at 8, declared that she wanted to be a doctor. No one was quite sure where she got this idea, as she had never met a real doctor. But she was determined, already practicing on her dolls and any animal that would sit still long enough. A doctor, Nora mused. That would require education, proper schooling. "Then we will find a way to get her proper schooling," Weston said, "if that is what she wants." They started saving money for Willa's education, planning ahead for the day when she would be old enough to attend a real school, maybe even a medical college. It seemed impossible, a mountain man's daughter becoming a doctor. But Weston and Nora had built their entire life on doing the impossible. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Weston surprised Nora with a gift. He had been working on it in secret for months, carving and sanding until it was perfect. When he presented it to her, she gasped. It was a rocking chair made from oak he had hauled down from the high country. Every inch of it was smooth and perfect, with their initials carved into the back along with the date of their wedding. "For all those mornings you have handed me coffee," he said. "I figured you deserved something special." She ran her hands over the smooth wood, tears in her eyes. "It is beautiful, the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me. You deserve beautiful things." He pulled her into his arms. "You deserve everything good in this world." She looked up at him, this man who had been a stranger 15 years ago and was now the center of her universe. "I have everything good. I have you, I have our children. I have this life we built together. What more could I possibly want?" "Nothing," he said and kissed her, "because we have it all." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat together in the new rocking chair on the porch, Nora in Weston's lap, despite her protests that they were too old for such things. They watched the stars come out, listened to the sounds of the forest, and felt the peace that comes from a life well lived. "You ever regret it?" Nora asked softly. "Giving up your solitude, having your life invaded by a stubborn woman and 3 wild children, not for a single second." He tightened his arms around her. "My life did not start until you walked into it. Everything before that was just me surviving. You taught me how to live. You taught me the same thing." She turned to look at him in the starlight. "In Boston, I was suffocating under everyone's expectations. But here, with you, I can breathe. I can be myself. I can be free." "We freed each other," Weston said. "That is what love does." They sat there until the moon rose high and the night turned cold, neither wanting to break the spell of the moment. Finally, Nora shivered and Weston carried her inside up to their loft and showed her with his hands and mouth how much he loved her. The years continued to pass. Willow married Samuel in a beautiful ceremony in Ukiah, and they built a house not far from town. She and her husband worked the land together, and within 2 years they had given Weston and Nora their first grandchild, a boy named Thomas. Weston, holding his grandson for the first time, felt the same overwhelming love he had felt when holding his own children. "He is perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like his grandfather," Willow said with a smile. Wade continued working as a guide and eventually met a young woman from San Francisco who had come west for adventure. Her name was Clara, and she was as comfortable in the wilderness as Wade himself. They married and continued living in the mountains, building their own cabin a few miles from Weston and Nora's. Willa, true to her childhood dream, proved to be brilliant. She devoured every book she could get her hands on, and when she was 16, Weston and Nora sent her to San Francisco to attend a proper school. It broke their hearts to be separated from her, but they knew it was what she needed. She wrote letters home constantly, telling them about her studies and her life in the city. And when she came home for visits, she would regale them with stories about anatomy and medicine and all the things she was learning. Weston listened with pride, amazed that this brilliant young woman was his daughter. On the morning of their 25th wedding anniversary, Weston woke to find Nora already up, as always. Her hair was now streaked with silver, and there were lines around her eyes, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her arguing with the stagecoach driver. She handed him his coffee, their fingers brushing as they had every morning for 25 years. That jolt of electricity was still there, maybe softer now but no less real. 25 years, Nora said, settling into her rocking chair with her own cup. Can you believe it? Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like you have been here forever. He joined her on the porch, sitting in the chair he had built beside hers. Either way, they have been the best years of my life. Mine too. She reached over and took his hand. Do you know what I remember most clearly from that first morning, when I handed you coffee for the first time? What? The look in your eyes, like you could not believe someone was doing something kind for you, like you had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. She squeezed his hand. That look broke my heart, and it made me determined to keep handing you coffee every morning until that look went away. And has it gone away? Yes. Now when I hand you coffee, you look at me with love, with trust, with the certainty that I will be there tomorrow and the day after and all the days after that. Her eyes shimmered with tears. That is what I always wanted, to be the person you trusted to be there. Weston felt his throat tighten with emotion. You are the only person I have ever trusted completely, the only person who has never let me down. That goes both ways. She looked out at the mountains, at the land they had made their own. We built something good here, Weston. Not just this house or this life, but us. We built each other up, made each other better, and that is what I am most proud of. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise over the mountains, and Weston felt complete. His life had turned out nothing like he had planned all those years ago when he fled to the mountains to live alone. But it had turned out so much better than he could have ever imagined, because Nora had handed him coffee that first morning and every morning since. And in that simple gesture, she had given him everything: love, home, family, purpose, a reason to wake up and face each day with hope instead of resignation. The mountain man had been hers from that first morning, though it had taken him a while to realize it. And he would be hers until his last breath. As the sun climbed higher, they heard stirring inside the house. Wade had come to visit with Clara and their 2 young sons. Willow and Samuel were expected later with their growing family. And Willa had written that she would be home for a visit next month, with news she wanted to share in person. Their home would be full again, loud and chaotic and wonderful, just the way they liked it. But for now, for these few quiet moments, it was just Weston and Nora, holding hands and drinking coffee and appreciating the beautiful life they had built together. I love you, Nora said, for the millionth time. I love you too, Weston replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. And tomorrow morning, just like every morning before, Nora would hand him his coffee and their fingers would brush, and he would be reminded all over again how lucky he was. The mountain man had found his home, and it was not a place. It was a person. It was Nora, who had seen past his rough exterior to the man underneath, who had chosen him when she could have chosen anything else, who had loved him when he did not know how to love himself. She handed him coffee every morning and he was hers, completely, irrevocably, forever hers. And that was the greatest gift he had ever received. Years continued their steady march forward. Weston and Nora grew older, their hair turning more silver, their movements a bit slower, but their love never diminishing. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated births and weddings, and mourned the loss of friends like Mrs. Patterson, who passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 89. When Weston was 60 and Nora was 55, they made the decision to start spending winters in Ukiah rather than in their mountain cabin. The harsh winters were becoming harder on their aging bodies, and with most of their children and grandchildren settled near town, it made sense to be closer to them during the coldest months. But every spring, as soon as the snow melted, they would return to their cabin in the mountains. Because that was where they had fallen in love, where they had built their life, and where their hearts would always truly belong. Willa eventually became a doctor, one of the first female physicians in California. She opened a practice in San Francisco, but came home to visit regularly, bringing with her a kind and gentle husband who supported her groundbreaking work. She never had children of her own, too dedicated to her patients, but she was a beloved aunt to all her nieces and nephews. Wade and Clara had 4 children who grew up wild and free in the mountains, carrying on the family tradition of living close to the land. Willow and Samuel had 5, and their farm prospered, becoming one of the most productive in the region. Weston and Nora watched their family grow and multiply, their legacy spreading across California. They had started with just the 2 of them, 2 lonely people who found each other, and now they had created an entire dynasty of people who carried their values and their love forward into the future. On the morning of their 40th wedding anniversary, Weston woke in their house in Ukiah to find Nora already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise. He joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, and they stood together in comfortable silence. 40 years, he said eventually. Feels impossible. Feels right, Nora corrected. She turned in his arms to face him. Every single day with you has felt right. She went to pour him coffee, but this time he stopped her. Let me. He prepared 2 cups of coffee, making them just the way she liked, and brought them back to where she stood. He handed her a cup, their fingers brushing in that familiar way, and they both smiled at the jolt that still ran between them after all these years. Thank you, Nora said softly, for giving me a life I could never have imagined, for loving me exactly as I am, for being my partner in every sense of the word. I should be thanking you. He touched her face gently, his calloused fingers tracing the lines time had drawn there. You saved me, Nora. I was dying in that cabin, alone and convinced that was how I was meant to live. And then you came along with your stubborn chin and your green eyes and your determination to make your own way in the world. And you saved me without even trying. We saved each other. Yes, we did. They drank their coffee and talked about their plans for the day. Their entire family was gathering for a celebration dinner that evening. All their children and grandchildren would be there, filling the house with noise and love and life. But in that moment, it was just the 2 of them, the way it had been at the beginning. Just Weston and Nora, 2 people who had chosen each other and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. As the day progressed and their family began to arrive, Weston found himself reflecting on his incredible luck. He thought about that September day 40 years ago when a stubborn young woman had climbed his mountain looking for work. He had almost sent her away. almost let fear and habit convince him to keep his solitude. How different his life would have been if he had made that choice. How empty, how meaningless. Instead, he had taken a chance. He had let her stay, and she had changed everything. During the celebration dinner, their oldest grandson Thomas stood to make a toast. He was 20 years old now, strong and capable, with Willow's green eyes and Weston's build. "I want to say something about my grandparents," Thomas said, raising his glass. "Growing up, I heard stories about how they met, about how grandmother came up the mountain looking for work and grandfather gave her a chance, about how they fell in love and built a life together. And I always thought it was a nice story, a romantic story. But as I got older, I realized it was more than that. It was a story about courage, about two people brave enough to take a chance on each other, to build something new, to create a family from nothing but love and determination. Everything we have, all of us in this room, exists because of that courage, because 40 years ago they chose each other, and they keep choosing each other every single day." He raised his glass higher. "To Weston and Nora Quade, the strongest people I know. May we all be lucky enough to find a love like theirs." "To Weston and Nora." Everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Weston felt Nora's hand slip into his under the table, and he squeezed it gently. They did not need the toast or the celebration, though both were appreciated. They had each other. They had their family. They had the life they had built together. That was more than enough. Late that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Weston and Nora sat together on the porch of their Ukiah house. It was not the same as their mountain cabin, but it was still theirs, still home. "Do you have any regrets?" Weston asked. "About leaving Boston, about choosing this life?" Nora looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Are you joking? This life is everything I ever wanted and 1,000 things I did not know I wanted. You are everything I ever wanted." Even when things were hard, when we struggled, especially then, because we struggled together, we faced every challenge as partners, and that made us stronger. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I would choose you again, Weston Quade, every single time. I would choose you too." He kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made." They sat there until the moon rose high and stars filled the sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last forever. The mountain man and the woman who had handed him coffee every morning for 40 years, the woman who had become his home, the woman who had given him everything, his Nora. And as they finally headed inside to bed, Weston thought about tomorrow morning. When he would wake up and Nora would hand him his coffee, their fingers would brush, and he would be reminded once again of how blessed he was. 40 years, and that simple gesture still meant everything. 40 years, and he still loved her more with each passing day. 40 years, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would love her until his last breath and beyond. The mountain man was hers. He had always been hers, from that very first morning when she handed him a cup of coffee and changed his life forever. And he would be hers for all the days to come, loving her with everything he had, grateful for every moment they had together. Because some loves are written in the stars, and theirs was one of them.